Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And Blizzard made some massive class changes and did a lot of buffs to a lot of specialization. So I wanted to update my PvP tier list for the midnight beta in this weekly iteration. Now, I do anticipate that they are going to be likely making weekly tuning adjustments. I sure do hope so, in terms of getting the game into a position where we aren't spending time, instantly dead at 0%, but also not spending all of our time at 100% health without any movement. I feel like there's got to be a sweet spot in the middle between the BFA slow-paced games and the Shadowlands one-shots that has to be achievable. Right now, basically your spec either fits in a slow spot where it doesn't feel like it's doing anything, or your spec fits into a spot where it's one-shotting, which I think is probably the least ideal situation for a majority of specializations. However, there's a handful of them that I think are riding that sweet spot in the middle. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So let's get started here with Warlock. Now, Warlock is a highly coveted class across the board. However, I do think that some specializations are outshining others. Affliction in particular, I think it does a lot of damage, has a lot of mobility, but struggles a lot with melee DPS, and there are a lot of melee DPS on the come up that are very difficult to deal with, even with the extra crowd control effects that you do have. For me, I'm putting it onto A tier. I think it's an okay pick, but in melee lobbies with no interrupt bar now, without add-ons, getting through all the interrupts is incredibly challenging and can be very frustrating. However, I think in the hands of the best players, you're likely going to be able to dominate. This is a specialization I think that is reserved, though, for those highly coveted best players. If you're just like an average Joe, you might want to stick to something like Destruction instead, because it's going to be quite a ride. Arcane Mage, another specialization I think that is still very advanced, even despite the simplifications applied to it, with a lot of mechanics that stack up and ramp in order to do effective damage and to understand how to basically move a health bar down. Makes it a lot more complicated than other specializations. However, it's really strong, but I'm not sure if it's the strongest thing. So it's hard for me to put this one on S tier. I think I'm going to leave it on A tier for now. It has a huge high power finishing power at the moment, with just Arcane Surge and the new touch of the Magi mechanic, with stacks of barrage damage with the nerfs that were applied. It's still able to crack out some really big damage. However, I think it struggles heavily with hunters, and hunters are really good right now. So I mean, you might even feel B tier as Arcane in those types of situations. Arms Warrior, this might be a hot take, but I think Arms Warrior is total doo-doo. You're just going to get kited by every range class that has slows at the moment. If they implement some type of talent that suppresses slows or something to make snares less of an absolute headache, because even if you get uptime, you can't even really compete with the damage output of a lot of classes that get way better uptime or can hit people from ranged for the most part. It just feels very wet noodle. You're just not able to get any momentum on it as either hero tree. I've seen this pretty much a sentiment from every single warrior player, and even though Second Wind was a really powerful effect for healing, in rated PvP situations where healing is reduced or there's a lot of targets hitting you, becomes significantly less effective. So it's just very, very big struggle bus at the moment. Now, Assassination Rogue was on D tier the last time I made this tier list. They did buff it. The damage is somewhat increased, but its lack of mobility, much like Warrior, I think is going to hold it back a lot. And honestly, it probably needs another round of tuning in terms of bumping up its damage, at least in PvP. I don't know if they're tuning dungeons and PvP at the same time, or just focusing on dungeons, because obviously they're going to tune for dungeons and raids, and then after all that's done, I would imagine then, okay, now we can tune for PvP, because otherwise it's like, okay, they've made a change for dungeons and now we have to redo the thing we just did for PvP, right? It's like an order of operations thing for them, not so much a PvP isn't our priority type of deal. But I would say, like, at best it's C tier. It doesn't have the same punch. Sustain is really hard. You can't get multi-bleeds against multiple range that are just going to be kiting you really hard. The changes to DRs as well negatively affects you probably the most of all specializations. I think it's just creeping up slightly from where it was before. Augmentation, I don't know where to rank it because I never see it. I don't think that it's completely terrible, but I don't think it's amazing, and it's really just fitting this weird niche for a lot of players. I'm gonna leave tanks until the end here. Beastmaster, I think, is still S tier. The stampede damage that you have during Beast of Wrath, the barb shot damage is really high. it's a little bit weaker on the defensive side, and there are some specializations that can take advantage of that with the recent changes that came through. But I think it's still really strong, really face roll, probably the best like easy spec in terms of just steamrolling through the game. Now, Feral Druid's a very hard one for me to place because I've seen my own personal experiences on it. It was like, yeah, you've got the kit is there, you got good crowd control, good lockdown, good mobility, but like didn't feel like the damage was there for me personally. So I'm riding like a middle of the pack kind of vibe for it at the moment. It's maybe like one tuning adjustment away from being really good, but I think other melee outshine you in terms of performance as far as burst, and right now that's like the main thing that you want to have. Balanced Druid I think is really good right now. It just does a huge amount of damage, basically the same play style as it was throughout the War Within and Dragonflight. Not a huge amount of change other than you've got to activate your Eclipse, which honestly makes it I think a little bit stronger because it's not obvious that you're ramping into Eclipse anymore. You just pop the button. You're not having to do the 2 pump cast before you get into it. I think it's at least A tier. I almost want to say S tier. But maybe I'm going to reserve that a little bit more exclusively this time around. So definitely a good pick though still. Devourer Demon Hunter still has really big one-shot damage if you're able to get the stacks going in your Void Metamorphosis, all of the resets, really flashy animations. The damage buff to the Reap and Consume combo was definitely felt. I think it could use a little bit more of what they were doing before, lowering down the burst and upping the sustain. And they've really got to take a good look at Collapsing Star, whether it's through the PvP talent that they have for it, to actually make it a viable ability, because it just doesn't hit for a large amount of damage for how long it takes to get to and how difficult it is actually to achieve. And I think if they do another round of tuning to bring up the sustain and bring down the burst and then do something with Collapsing Star, that it could likely be really good. I do think it's actually still pretty competitively viable, but definitely not S tier. The main reason is because of the classes that are in S tier can absolutely run you over in a lot of cases. But I think it's starting to form up really nicely. Again, most of these specializations are starting to form up. We just need consistent tuning. If they keep going at it, and I think we can get there. Demonology Warlock definitely still S tier. Really good crowd control. Mobility is felt the most on this one. Just really good sustained damage as well. Just insanely strong. Just really well rounded. Has Mortal Strike. It's going to be very durable. Dark Pact is just a really strong shield at the moment. I think it's a little bit better than Affliction just because you have the multiple schools of magic. The Mortal Strike I think adds an effect, and obviously having the extra stun, and now having access to kick, which nothing really changed there. It's just still in the S tier position. Destruction Warlock, really high amount of damage at the moment. I think it's probably the best of the A tier, if not the S tier. But I'm trying to like reserve the S tier, and maybe I should drop Arcane or something. But I can't feel like it deserves to drop. Is the only thing. But this is the easiest lock spec to play out of all of the three, and it's going to give you good performance if you're kind of a beginner at the game for sure. Just really good overall damage, good kit. Obviously having Coil and Hell of Terror is a big benefit. However, I would say the trade-off is that you're probably the squishiest of all three. And that's the trade-off for the ease of use of your kit. Devastation Evoker, another one that I think is actually really good, probably a bit better than Affliction. Also, if it ends up being a really melee dominant meta, Devastation, Boomkin, and Mage can actually usually take over in that type of situation. So it really depends on where we see the swing as far as viability for specializations and what type of meta is going to start to formulate. Discipline Priest, Void Weaver is dead. I played it, was just not able to get any output. However, other Discipline Priests are telling me that Oracle is really good. I still think it's kind of just mid at the moment, even across the board. I think other healers are just offering more significant damage with less effort and more sustainability. Oftentimes I have targets just dying through pain suppression in a lot of cases. So for me, Discipline Priest is just kind of, it's got good crowd control avoidance, but it's still just kind of average relative to the strengths of a lot of the other healers right now in the beta. Elemental Shaman, again, for me, is still just a D tier. This guy, they did a great job with the ability pruning and bringing down, the complexity of the spec. It just needs numbers. That's it. It just needs tuning. So I don't know if that tuning's not coming because it's really strong in Mythic Plus, so they want to wait and see what happens. And if they're going to nerf it Mythic Plus, well, that makes sense for PvP, or does it make sense for PvP or something like that? I don't know, but it really just needs a bump. Like, just bring the numbers up on every ability in PvP, and it will feel really good with the rework that was applied to. But without those numbers, I just don't see it going too far. Enhancement Shaman, kind of cheesy one shot, whether you're playing Doomwinds or Ascendants as Stormbringer at the moment. I have not seen a lot of totemic Enhancement Shamans, if any. But you're definitely not in a terrible spot, given that you have that one shot, but it's kind of cheesy, similar to Devourer. Like I said, like some specs are in Shadowlands one shots, other specs are playing, BFA. They can't do anything for a very extended period of time. Some specs are just fine and they're chilling in the middle. So hopefully we'll get everybody to the chilling in the middle part before the expansion actually releases for Season 1. And I will say the track record for Season 1 in Dragonflight and the War Within as far as balance was actually very good. I've actually usually had the most fun in Season 1. So hopefully all of this beta testing, I'm hoping they open the beta to the public without having to pay for it at some point, but maybe everybody who already paid for it is going to get upset if they do that. I don't really know. I just feel like it's like we need as much testing and data gathering as possible, because some specializations that I was writing off ended up having like an ulterior hero talent build that just was like, oh my god, this is actually really good. So there's a lot of stuff still yet to be discovered. So don't look at this tier list and think that this is definitively the best thing or the best rating for any of these specs. They may have something that's hidden. Frost Death Knight, I just don't see this spec like almost at all. I think Unholy is significantly better, but much like Ellie, it's like it just needs numbers. Bring the numbers up and then boom, we're in the running, right? Make Frost Strike, make Obliterate, make Howling Blast, and Disease do a little bit more damage. We're in the running. The spec will be doing great, but at the moment, I just can't see it doing spectacularly. Fire Mage, I'm actually lowering this rank a little bit, mostly just because due to the prevalence of hunters, but I think the other mage specs are actually much better at the moment. I think they give a lot more control and durability for a lot of the melee DPS is the main advantage between Arcane and Frost over Fire that I've noticed personally from watching mages like Aegis and watching them switch between Fire and Frost and the advantages that they get with that. So I think it's not totally dead, but it's still just very one tricky, oriented around combustion, and you can get wins with it, but not crazy. So I think just middle of the pack's great. Frost, this is a tough one. Frost is it's really cheesy. It does all of its damage in Ray. So if the other team basically saves everything to stop your Ray of Frost, you might feel useless. If they don't know what it is, you're just going to bowl everybody over. You're doing decent damage now with the readjustment of damage. You're definitely in a better spot than you were before. I think A tier is like at least the spot where you should be sitting as far as range DPS are concerned. Look how many DPS are, for the most part. Some of these have some pain points. Affliction, I think, especially, and I don't really like the damage like all in on one ability. I feel like in the past they've given feedback that they don't want that, right? They want sustain, your overall damage to do good, not just one ability, not just one cooldown. So some specs do need more adjustments, even though they can work and feel like an A tier spec. They feel like they're stuck with just one ability being the main reason that they're in that spot, which I don't think is a great reason to be in that spot, right? So it's a little bit more than just it's an A tier spec. It's like, why is it an A tier spec? That also needs to be taken into consideration. Fury Warrior, I think, is better than Arms Warrior from what I've seen. Particularly gotten a few lobbies of Mez last night. It seems like his damage is a lot higher, but the reason it's mid is just because it's going to get kited, and it's much like Arms is just you're not going to move. Mobility is a huge issue for these guys, and obviously they can gig above your damage, so if you touch someone for a millisecond, then it doesn't matter that your mobility is lower, and that's kind of how Warrior used to be in older expansions for PvP. You didn't get to hit somebody longer than a second, but when you hit them, they got bowled over. Now you just don't get to hit them, and even if you do get to hit them, you do nothing. So feels bad, but I do think it's a little better than Arms. That's why I think I'm going to put it on a B tier. In certain situations and matchups, you'll likely feel good, but other ones you'll feel completely terrible. Havoc Demon Hunter, I also think is kind of just mid at the moment. I don't know what happened to it other than maybe nerfs that were applied to Devour also were applied to Havoc, but it just doesn't seem as intimidating. Not totally awful, but not as intimidating as far as its damage output is concerned. They've simplified the class with the changes to Essence Break, which is great. It's hopefully going to be bringing in new players as a result, but its overall throughput is a little bit low. Holy Priest, this is a hard one because I think it's doing better, but I still think it's kind of average relative to a lot of other healers. So maybe this is like a little bit too low of a position for it, but I think B tier is kind of fair, just a little bit too low on the output, is my opinion on it at the moment, relative to other healers, especially on the damage side of things, because something like Holy Paladin, especially if you're playing Lightsmith, you do a lot of just good damage, instant healing, good sustain on your mana, immunities for emergency situations, just great spec. And especially now without add-ons, things like Blessing of Sacrifice, people just CC into it because they don't have their add-on beeping a foghorn that you have it. So you feel a lot better in a lot of the situations where crowd control would be a lot more frustrating. Marksmanship Hunter is doing okay. Obviously the 3-second aim shot I think everybody's been memeing on, but I think it's still like in an A tier position, at least. I think BM and probably Survival are slightly better though, but it's still really good. You did lose a lot of utility. I think as a hunter, that's what you're going to notice the most when you go into this, is not having the tar trap, root, not having the scatter shot. But you do have good overall throughput, putting you into a viable position. Mistweaver Monk, another healer I'm going to slap up onto S tier. Just really good throughput, adds a lot of good damage to the mix. I think much like Paladin, just like with the changes to crowd control, you guys are in a lot better of a spot, because those used to be your main weaknesses, and those are gone, and your throughput's high at the same time. Now, obviously, a throughput change on these guys could switch things up, but it is a great option. Outlaw Rogue, I think much like Assassin, it's bumped up a little. They were down on D tier. I think they're moving up again. Like, good tuning pass, just a small amount of damage. Let's ease into this, see where we can get them. But I think it's going to need another one for these two guys in order to get out of the bottom ranks to actually feel more viable relative to definitely Subtlety Rogue. Preservation Evoker, I still think is the weakest healer. Maybe not totally unviable, but definitely the weakest healer. Just seems like they took a lot of your damage away, which is unfortunate. I know for a lot of Evokers, losing the interrupt as well, because you're a healer that kind of needs to get really close to the engagement a lot of the times. But it just seems like the lack of damage is my biggest pain point for it. And some of your cooldowns don't feel as effective as they used to. Things like Rewind in particular. Resto Druid, really good one at the moment. Really just I don't want to put too many healers on the S tier, but I think it could be an S tier healer. Maybe Paladin Mistweaver, maybe a little bit higher, but Resto Druid just has really good throughput. I love that you have time to integrate more things in cat form and cyclones than before with the changes that they made to it. Main pain point Resto Druid is just the UI with how HOTS are tracked and traced on the raid frames, and like knowing exactly how much their duration of time is there. Things like that could be a bit annoying, but I think it is actually a really good healer at the moment for the time being. Rep Paladin, really good pick. Just overall good damage. Obviously lost Repentance. I think most Rets are just, every Paladin for the most part is just playing Searing Glare. Just a super effective control. Just a lot of people don't notice it, and totally negates cooldowns in a lot of the cases. But just solid pick still. Resto Shaman. I think Resto Shaman is better than Disc and Holy. I'm gonna save that one for a little bit later. Shadow, if you play Halo, so every Shadow I've seen is switching from Voidweaver over to Archon now, and Archon looks like it does really good. Archon looks really good. If you play Voidweaver, it feels a lot weaker than before, but if you play Archon, it feels really good. So I'm going to smack Shadow into the A tier as well. Like I said, like some specs feel really good. The main advantage here is you're really durable. It is tough to take down a Shadow Priest if you're not likely one of these specs in the S tier at least. They're really tanky. Subtlety Rogue, I am smacking up here into the S tier. Remarkable damage still, very simple, easy to pull off. Although a lot of like main rogues for a while are maybe not enjoying it as much because it's just so overly simplified, but its performance is there. The numbers don't lie. Survival Hunter, same thing. Boomstick just goes boom and triple kills entire teams. Throughput is there, but much like Subtlety, a lot of survival mains are feeling the crunch of losing a lot of the main utility that made them feel cool. But as far as viability, they are definitely at the top. Unholy DK, I think, is still one of the best melee. I think I have to put him on S tier too, even despite some of the nerfs that came through. Just really good throughput. I think the changes to one of your talents that affects your self healing is also giving you a bit more sustain than you had before. And a lot of the specs that would give you a hard time, like warriors, are just like, they're just not really viable. So you're having free reign in that regard. Windwalker, okay, maybe I'm slapping too many up here, but Windwalker jumped up to S this week with the buffs that it got. Rising Sun Kick can hit almost 50% of a player's health in a lot of situations. We include all the other modifiers stacked into it when you get a bunch of procs together. It's really good. This is really good. So like maybe at worst Unholy would drop a tier, but I feel like leaving these guys here at the top is probably more than fair. And then finally we got to get to Resto Shaman, this is the hardest one for me to rank. Because I don't think it's stronger than Druid. I think Druid is stronger, but I think Priest, it's like pretty even. So maybe it's like a B tier pick. I think probably like somewhere in here at the moment, equal to Priests. But these guys are squeaking out pretty massively ahead. And then Druid, if it's played well, can perform better than these guys. If it's played worse, then maybe not. And then Prez being the weakest. I think this is probably like a fair outline. Tanks is hard for me to rank. Again, I think I am a bit concerned about them. I think in world PvP, obviously, tanks are going to be extremely dominant. Healers also, because there's no dampening. So if you're going to cheese people, that would be, probably the route that you want to go. And the tanks do keep getting buffs every week. I think they're trying their hardest to make tanking more appealing, so that Q's times are lower for LFG. Honestly, I had this idea last night that maybe they should remove Mortal Strike from the classes and just, you know, reduce healing in PvP in general across the board. That way you'd have more comp viability. So maybe LFG wouldn't be as annoying for finding teams for going for things like Gladiator in that, because at the moment it feels like the best comps are going to have Mortal Strike, then plus the best ranged, right? And I feel like it's just going to be the same meta again as we've seen, even with class tuning adjustments, just because of how important having Mortal Strike is at the moment. But these guys down here, for the most part, are just like a couple number tuning ups from being decent, except Warrior maybe, again, because of the mobility. A bit worried about Assassination mobility as well. A lot of specs do feel really good, but some of them it's because of some cheesy one-shot mechanic that's probably going to get nerfed, and then it might not feel so good. These guys are probably going to get nerfed. Maybe not DK so much, which is why I kind of want to drop it down a little bit. But like, these guys are, I would be surprised if you guys survive the rest of the beta without having some of your kit targeted for nerfs. So you probably want to be like somewhere in upper B or like lower A, honestly, at this point in the stage of the beta, as far as like viability. But they usually do a lot of significant PvP changing even after the expansion releases. So we'll have to wait and see. But this is where we're at the moment. Those are my thoughts on how things are going. So thank you guys very much for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown and the update, and I will see you in the next one.